A look at some of the latest mock drafts across the internet for the Miami Dolphins for 2 weeks from today. And big surprise, number 10 is in the headlines once again.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, the NFL Draft lead for the 33rd team. I want to give a special welcome and shout-out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it. We live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Dolphins wide receiver Tyreek Hill in the headlines earlier this week, prompting a formal statement from the team about law enforcement being called to an apartment for a domestic dispute. As the details came out, neither party, it's deemed to be a closed case. We'll touch on it at the end of the show, right? Because I really don't want to dedicate any more airtime to this clown car experience than what we have to. So we're going to keep the main thing. We're going to take a look at a couple of mock drafts across the space in the industry, and then we'll finish with the Tyreek Hill stuff at the end of the show. But mock draft to Palooza 3.0 here today. Try not to spam too many mock draft aggregation shows, but always love to kind of stop, especially you get a week, 2 weeks out from the draft. Everybody gets a little bit more courage. They start doing 2-round mocks, right? So I have a couple of former coworkers who have done mock drafts, and one of them I know is a 2-round mock, and that's courtesy of Brentley Weissman, who used to work with me at the Draft Network. We're going to touch on the first round of that mock, and then Connor Rogers, who was a former coworker for a brief period of time at the Draft Network. He did a mock draft, and the former first draft combo of McShay and Kiper did mock drafts, and going to talk about what they gave the Dolphins, and then we'll finish with the Tyreek Hill stuff. So I will start with Brentley Weissman, and if you're not familiar with Brentley and Brentley's background, Brentley is a former NFL and college scout. Worked for the Chargers for a period of time, worked for the Oregon Ducks program. He's an Oregon alumni. Very smart guy. I have a great deal of respect for Brentley for the pathway that he took, getting into NFL scouting early, then transition to college, and now on the media side of things. And we shared a couple of draft cycles together, and he's made me a smarter analyst and my perspective of how I consume the game. So a couple of things about before pick 13 and Brentley's mock that stand out to me. The Shadur Sanders scenario that played out as we went through kind of trade up hypotheticals or trade down for the Dolphins hypotheticals. Sanders went at 9, so he didn't get past kind of that magic threshold of where maybe you would see a team make the leap up the board. Interestingly enough, some names that were on the board when the Dolphins picked Will Johnson was on the board. The corner from the University of Michigan, Jahdae Barron, was on the board of the cornerback, defensive back from the University of Texas. Neither one of those players the pick. Brentley gave the Dolphins Tyler Warren, the tight end out of Penn State. I've done this pick in a mock before. It was a while ago. I don't think there's any question. Like the fit is apparent. And, between Julian Hill and Pharaoh Brown, who the Dolphins really didn't give a lot of long-term money to, it is a player who I think could be a force multiplier for the offense in both the passing game and the running game. So I see the value of making the pick. It does not address one of your primary needs, but I'm really going to try to keep the perspective and let's wait and see what the entirety of the roster looks like. You shouldn't have to pigeonhole that, even though the Dolphins have needs. Now, is this maybe a potential hypothetical trade down scenario where Will Johnson's on the board and Jahdae Barron, as we mentioned, and you have an opportunity with another quarterback and Jackson Dart, who is on the board with this pick? I don't know. does a team, would you take a trade down for a team to get in front of Indy who might otherwise take Tyler Warren for themselves? I can't say that for certain. I'm not mad about the pick. I understand the pick. I think it's a great fit. Tyler Warren's one of my six or seven best overall talents on my Dolphins specific draft board, I believe. Let me pull up the exact number. I like to have the horizontal board, which we kind of looked at a little bit yesterday. Tyler Warren's 7th, tied for 5th. I have the same grade for the Dolphins on Tyler Warren as I do for Will Johnson. How could I be mad at that pick? Tied for 5th place. Tied for the 5th best fit. You give him a 13. Now, it doesn't address your needs, which puts more pressure on young players and later draft picks and free agency with veteran players and potentially swinging a trade and getting really creative. That's the reality of the world that the Dolphins are living in as a whole. But that pick at 13 is not going to fix all your problems no matter what. Connor Rogers, his scenario. He has Shedeur Sanders sliding. Where does Shedeur goes? Well, this is a what would he do mock, which is worth putting that label on it because he actually does not have Shedeur going at all in the first round. He doesn't have Jackson Dart in the first round at all. So Connor, with his exercise for NBC Sports on if he was the GM for all 32 teams, really underscores the separation that he thinks exists with Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. Players that are on the board, Tyler Warren goes to Dallas. Malachi Starks is the pick for the Dolphins at 13. It's a very popular one. But in quick succession afterwards, you have Will Johnson at 16, Kenneth Grant at 17, Gray Zabel at 18, Derek Harmon, who we've talked about as a potential fit at 21. So no shortage of options, and Brent and Connor doing a mock that is, what would I do specifically? I think he kind of echoes some of what we've talked about those being the right kinds of players in that range and stratosphere. And I love the fact that he has Gray Zabel slotted in there too as a player who, well, maybe at 13 as an interior guy, you don't love the value, but I think he's a high floor player with a high ceiling as well. And guys like that at positions of need, like if you can get down just a little bit and coax somebody up to get a better player, that selection plus added value is not a bad world and hypothetical to live in. Now, I kind of glossed over another former coworker, Jeff Risdon. And we're gonna do Jeff as well as the former first draft combo of Kiper McShay. That's coming up after the break. And then we'll get into Tyreek after we go through another 3 mock drafts and the picks that they made for the Dolphins 2 weeks out. That's what you have up next here on Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. Getting down to the game should be an exciting experience because there's nothing like the energy of the game, whether it's last-minute Major League Baseball showdowns or soaking in an NBA playoff matchup. Finding great seats at a great pace can be a challenge unless you use Game Time. Game Time makes scoring last-minute tickets easier than ever before. Prices usually drop as the event gets closer, and with their all-in pricing, you can see total cost upfront with no surprises at checkout. And with last-minute deals, you could save up to 60% off by buying last-minute deals for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. You name it, and you can also have peace of mind when you purchase. You get panoramic views from the seats so you know the sight lines before you hit commit, and there's no surprise fees and the lowest price guarantee. You can book on Game Time with total confidence. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, download Game Time, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets with the lowest prices, guaranteed. Let's talk Jeff Risdon. Jeff has been a staple of the USA Today wire sites. Helps run Draft Wire. Been a good friend of mine for 10 years in the industry. Looking at his scenario, and you got Cam Ward at 1, Shedeur Sanders at 9. You got Will Campbell going 4 to the Patriots. Tyler Warren's on the board for the Dolphins. Will Johnson's on the board for the Dolphins. Gray Zabel, Jahdae Barron on the board for the Dolphins. Let's see. Malachi Starks on the board. Kenneth Grant on the board for the Dolphins. Jihad Campbell on the board for the Dolphins. Tyler Booker on the board for the Dolphins. A lot of names a lot of people like. None of them to pick at 13. And I kind of talked myself. I don't know if I tipped my hand here. But when we did the deep dive on this player, and when we were going over options for 13, and we did the 10-minute segment and spotlight on this potential fit, I kind of caught myself after the fact, and I was like, dang, I think I kind of talked myself into really liking that fit. It's Nick Emmanwori, the safety from South Carolina, is the pick that Jeff Risdon gives the Dolphins. The potential core back seven being tied together with a revamped linebacker room that has a lot of range, a lot of explosive athletes. Obviously, you've got a rangy player in Ashton Davis with a to-be-determined ceiling as a player, right, if we're being honest. Yafitu Melfonwu, very diverse talent, a lot of scheme flexibility and alignment flexibility, and can play in the slot against tight ends, and can play deep half, and can fit as a sub linebacker, and fit the run, and can pressure off the edge. Like he could do a lot. It's been health, durability, and he had a late stage breakout after his first 2 seasons when he first came in the league. Emmanwori also gives you all of that, and all of that diversity and dynamic, explosive talent is the exact opposite of what you had last year with the ghost Jordan Poyer, right? And you had Anthony Walker or David Long looking like he didn't know what planet he was on, or when it was Anthony Walker, at least the execution was good, but you could tell he was a later stage player. And you had too many parts of that group were either out of position or trying to make too many things happen, or they just didn't have the bounce. And I remember we got to about the halfway point of the season, and I'm looking at the defense, and I'm watching the unit, and what becomes apparent is you need more dynamic athletes. More often than not in coverage, these guys have to go backwards, right? So when you're later stage players, you could really struggle with moving backwards and playing in a 3-dimensional plane in space. Your reactive athleticism, your reaction time, your quick twitch ability, there's more stress and pressure on it because you don't know the play. You have to react and have things happen second nature, and your technique's got to be in line, but not just your technique, but you have to have the bounce to be able to get off of your spot and go attack the football. I felt like there were too many holes in the Dolphins in the back seven in that regard. And you could probably, down the stretch, Kendall Fuller was fine as an ad for the Dolphins. I thought he played fine football, but the last month of the season, he looked like he was a corner that hit that age wall, and definitely felt he was slowing down a little bit, and had 3 injuries throughout the course of the season. So an addition of the quintessential dynamic, explosive athlete is a sell that's not hard for me to get excited about. Let's do Mel Kiper's next, because Mel put out a 2-rounder, and we're going to talk about the pairing of the fits. So Miami at pick 13, very popular selection, Jahdae Barron. Mel, I don't want to take the whole thing here, but Mel kind of teases the Teron Armstead retirement makes this interesting, but I really don't think that it did, because I think that they've been operating with this expectation that this was going to happen regardless. He does acknowledge Patrick Paul, which is more than you get from some draft analysts when talking about Teron Armstead's retirement. So that I appreciate that. Dolphins could start Paul and use this pick to clean up CB2 opposite Jalen Ramsey, where either Storm Duck, Cam Smith, or Ethan Bonner is currently slated to start. I would also include Kader Kohu in that conversation. But Barron being the fit, we've done the deep dive on why that makes some sense. No qualms with that being the pick. Emmanwori was on the board. Harmon was on the board. Gray Zabel was on the board. Malachi Stark's on the board. He goes a little bit later in the first round. And then you get down to the Dolphins pick at 48 in this scenario. And the Dolphins take Darius Alexander, who we touched on yesterday. He was in that second round bucket. Older player from a smaller school, but man, he is explosive and long. He's like a prototypical 4-eye or 3, and I think he's got enough athleticism that he could play either, so he could play in odd or even fronts. That'd be a really nice ad, and it's a really nice combo at spots that end up being two needs for the Dolphins with defensive tackle and corner. I think there's a pretty firm argument to be made that those could be best player availables. If I look at who goes after 48, Savon Revel, corner from East Carolina, but again, the Dolphins use pick 13 in Mel's scenario on a corner, so that kind of removes that from the calculus. Mason Taylor, Tyreek Williams. I personally have Tyreek Williams graded higher as a player than what I have Darius Alexander, but it depends. Some of that is role specific and what you're looking for in a player. I would acknowledge Xavier Watts was on the board. He went 62 to Buffalo in this scenario. And then also Jalen Knoll. Not that the Dolphins the Dolphins might need a receiver when it's all said and done. If you're watching and not listening, or if you're listening and not watching, I hope the sarcasm and just the utter disgust properly came through there. But Jalen Knoll, I think, is in that conversation, as is Jack Betch, who went at 54, and Jaden Higgins. But again, that's you're hedging a potential offloading of a headache more than you are filling needs, but it's hard because you want to fill the needs and address the needs, but you don't want to force picks. And I if you told me that the Dolphins were walking with Jahdae Barron and they were walking with Darius Alexander, and you told me I could guarantee it today, I'd sign on the line and I'd take it. I think it's two good fits and appropriate values that really help boost the defense. Now, we're going to get into McShay, who gave the Dolphins a pick at 13, and then we'll touch on the Tyreek Hill thing to bring today's episode of Locked On Dolphins to a close. So make sure you guys stick with us. So Todd's been doing awesome work with The Ringer, his YouTube show that he does. I guess he has like a newsletter that you could sign up for as well. He gave the Dolphins Shamar Stewart, the defensive lineman from Texas A&M, and I would sign on the line for this one too, because Shamar Stewart, I think, can help you to take some of the Calais Campbell role and distribute it into a younger player. Now, obviously, there's development that's required for that player, for that to hit. But Austin Clark's done a really nice job as the defensive line coach. And if he's not just being an outside linebacker, Shamar Stewart, if he's going to play inside as well, and he apparently played at A&M at a heavier weight than what he was at the combine at, and cut down into the 260s to test as explosively as he did. But if he's an interior guy playing at 290 with that kind of length, he's plenty explosive. And it kind of has some shades of a Calais Campbell type of build and athletic profile combination. So I like the fit, and McShay alludes to Calais Campbell. Apparently, according to McShay, the Dolphins brought Stewart in for a visit. I know he's from South Florida, so I don't know if that qualifies as a 30 visit or not. But the Dolphins knocking on the door. So in summary, through the 5 mock drafts that we looked at, Shamar Stewart, the pick, Jahdae Barron, the pick. Those are by McShay and Kiper, respectively. Nick Emmanwori by Jeff Risdon from USA Today. Brentley Weissman had Tyler Warren, the tight end from Penn State. And Connor Rogers had Malachi Starks, the safety from Georgia. If you go back and look at Short List for 13 episode we did 2 weeks ago, I had 16 first-round grades or better, with 3 that were disqualified for the pick at number 13 because of medical concerns or off-the-field character questions. Of the 13 players that were on the list, Jahdae Barron, top 5. Tyler Warren, tied for 5th. Malachi Starks, 9th. Shamar Stewart, 13th. Nick Emmanwori, 15th. Every single one of those guys was on that short list and was not disqualified on your list of 13 players. So fun to have that much variance, but an affirmation that these mocks are getting the right kind of names in here, in my opinion. And you could tell me you get any of them, and I'm giving you a thumbs up. I think it's good. What I don't think is good is Tyreek Hill getting his every 3 months negative headline for some questionable off the field decision making. This time, some dispute, and it's been reported that him and his wife are getting a divorce, and I don't care about that element of it. It's more the pattern of behavior, right? And this is a player who has every offseason, you're good for probably 2, if not more, headlines of just general poor judgment. And it sounds like things didn't get violent or physical, but just questionable decision making. There was a report about a broken laptop involved and a dispute about couples therapy, and apparently, allegedly, I'll be fair, allegedly, Tyreek blows a gasket and law enforcement's called, and it's been reported widely that the incident is considered closed. There's no legal ramifications or anything like that. But it just really underscores to me, like, if you're trying to change the culture of this football team, you're sitting on a time bomb. And I know people have questions and concerns about the talent and how do you replace the talent. And at some point, it stops being about football, right? And I know it's a football team, so that is the main thing. But there's more into being a good locker room and a good football team than just talent. And the pattern of behavior here is so obvious year over year over year over year, and not just in his time in Miami, that I really feel like if you think the Dolphins could run it back with Tyreek Hill this year and not have an incident that blows up in their face and potentially soils the well and threatens whatever potential good you bring in with coaching staff changes and schedule changes and bringing different people in and trying to do things differently to change the culture and all the young guys that you're bringing in. I don't know what to tell you. I really think you're living with your head in the sand. And I know that there's ramifications out of that, and this is going to make it more difficult to move on from him. And there's really no out for the Dolphins to cut Tyreek Hill. They would need conduct detrimental to the team that would relieve them of their 2025 salary guarantees because they reworked that contract in August of last year. Now, is there a world in which the Dolphins potentially pay the option bonus to get him on a cheaper salary, to get a team to take him, so potentially you're buying the pick? Yeah, that's a world that you could live in, but that's also going to potentially lose you significant amounts of salary cap. You're probably not going to be in a position to do that prior to June 1st, where you would be able to split the dead cap because you're accelerating more dead money in, and then you're adding $15 million on top of that. So you'd lose all that money in cap space. It's a really nasty situation, and it really just underscores, like, with how the season ended last year, if it was me, and I know this might not have been possible because of the wrist injury and recovery, you could have picked up the phone and offered me a bag of balls, and I'd have taken it then. And I'd have had him on the first plane out of here when the league year started. Because it's just a matter of time. And I know he's a Hall of Fame talent, and that's great. But at some point, enough's enough. And for me, it was enough in January. And I am so over it, and I will not change the tune. And I understand that there's a calculus of how do you replace that talent and how you go about doing that and creating another need for yourself. And I don't know that there's a way out of this at this stage of the game, not without significant added more complications of financial blowback because of the incentive you're going to have to offer a team, in my opinion, to take Tyreek Hill. So he's probably going to be here. And how do you revamp the culture around that? I don't know. I don't have a good answer. But the headlines came out yesterday, and it was just the latest in a long line of disgust with judgment away from the football field and sometimes on the football field with number 10. That's going to do it for us here today on the show. You can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always for checking out Locked On Dolphins, and I'll be back again tomorrow with more prep for the 2025 NFL Draft.